back with lesson number 9 in my Basics of Cross Stitch series. Today we are going to talk about silks. Everything about where they come from. I was wrong in what I told you in an earlier video about the different types of silk, so I'm going to correct that mistake. Talk about how they're spun just a little bit. I'm not going into any details about any of these, but just to give you an idea so that just you have an awareness of what silk is, where it comes from, and why it's good to use. I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of silk versus cotton. And at the end, and I have a wide variety of silks laid out here on my work table to show you and to talk about. Now, do I own all the silks that are out there in the stitching world? No, I do not. Am I an expert? No, I am not. I know a lot. I've had a lot of experience with them, but that does not mean I know everything. But I am going to share with you what I know. I did do some research so that I know a little more, and I'm going to share that with you. And then at the end, I am going to, I have a couple of the big skeins of Mrs. Sada's silks. I've had a lot of you recently ask about cutting those apart, and I do have an earlier video where I show how to do that, but I'm going to tag that on to the end, or I'm going to do it again here at the end of this video, so that kind of all the silk information is together in one place. I am going to now turn you guys around so you can look down at all the gorgeousness on my work table, and we will get started. Now I do have notes that I'll be reading to you, and yeah, I hope you get a lot out of it. As always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. All right, I'll be right back. All right, so as you can see, I have all kinds of different silks here to talk about today. But as I said, not anywhere near all of the silks that are out there in the general stitching world. I do have my light shining down on my work table so that basically so you can really see the silk shine. The light I was getting in from my windows downstairs just weren't enough. So let's get started. Where does silk come from? So most of you know that silk comes from silkworms, and silkworms are not harmed in the gathering of silk. It comes from their cocoons. The worms are taken out of the cocoons, and the cocoons are made into the silk. Now, 90%, I had mentioned in one of my earlier videos about when I was talking about silk, that there was a difference between mulberry silk and tussa silk, and that was related to the softness of the silk. There is a difference between mulberry and tussa, but that is not what's tied into the softness or the lack of durability, I guess I would say. So mulberry is the main silk that is used in the world today. 90% of the silk used today is mulberry silk, and it is usually produced in India. And it's called mulberry silk because the silkworms eat solely a diet of mulberry leaves. Tussa silk is from a different type of silkworm which only eats oak leaves. It is said that tussa silk is not as strong as mulberry, not as elastic. That comes into play a lot in knitting, in silk yarns for knitting, more so than in the stitching world. I believe that probably all of the silk used to make stitching threads is mulberry silk. I did not see that specifically any place, but that is what I believe. The difference in the durability of the silk and the softness and the shine comes from whether it is a filament or whether it is spun silk. Filament is taken from the cocoon. So you have the cocoon, and it is just drawn. It's just basically unwound from the cocoon as one long piece. And it has an incredible strength to it. This is the planet Earth silk. Actually, I think that must be spun, because filament silk is almost impossible to break. I mean, you really have to tug on it. And even then, oh, there we go, it finally broke. So It is much tougher. It does not pill as much. It does not fuzz as much. Filament silk versus spun silk. Spun silk is made from the remnants of the cocoons, from shorter pieces of the cocoon, and they're spun together. So as you can imagine, because they aren't one long strand, they don't have the tensile strength of a filament silk. So that's the main difference between them. There is a bit of a shine difference. This is Splendor by Rainbow Gallery. And you can see it's kind of a softer twist and a softer shine than, this is the Mrs. Seda silk, than a filament silk. I'm going to read to you a little bit from Mary Corbett's website telling the difference between filament and spun. The most obvious way to tell the differences in the look of the filament silk. In general, filament silk is glossy. So the filament silks are Mrs. Seda's. This one was a gift from somebody from Malaysia. I do not know if that's a particular brand or not. I don't believe so. Planet Earth is filament. So this is Soie d'Alger. That is filament. The Gloriana is filament. Dinky Dyes, I believe, is filament. I believe everything over here is spun. And the way to really know for sure is to go to the websites of these companies and look them up and see. I did not do that. Okay, so spun silk is made from the broken cocoons and leftovers and spun into a thread much in the same way that wool or cotton is spun into thread. It has a nice luster to it, a nice soft shine. Filament silk, on the other hand, is not spun. It is the fiber itself, reeled straight off the cocoon, and hence it's sometimes referred to as reeled silk, R-E-E-L-E-D, as in a fishing reel. 100% filament silk has more than just a soft luster to it. It has a downright shine, and I think you can see that in these. I mean, they really are a lot shinier, I think, than the softer look of the spun. If you're trying to determine whether the silk you're using is spun or filament, the first thing to do is look at it. Spun silk will have a soft luster, while filament silk has a high sheen. However, this isn't always a foolproof way of knowing with certainty whether you're working with spun or filament silk. Sometimes a twisted filament silk will not have quite as high a sheen as a flatter filament silk or a less twisted filament silk. We're getting a little bit technical here. So if you can't tell by looking, you can try picking. Try to pull the thread apart. Spun silk is weaker than filament silk, which is, you know, what I showed you, and will pull apart in kind of a shreddy way if you pick at it closely. Filament silk is much stronger and is much more difficult to pull apart. It definitely won't pull apart easily in small pieces because the individual strands that make up the thread are long and strong. So let's look at that then. We have a variety of different filament and spun silks. They're all made up of, the individual strands are all made up of 2-ply. And so when you're looking at it, I don't know whether you can see that, but they are, I mean, you untwist that, and that is 2 individual, very not sticky, not soft plies of silk. So that is the silk straight from the cocoon. If we look at the silks for you, get a strand of that. Now this is a tighter twist than what the Soie d'Alger has, but it's much kinkier. It doesn't want to untwist as well. It does eventually, but it's a stickier thread, I guess is what I want to say. Like if you look at the planet Earth, it just wants to fall apart. Not fall apart as in the thread, but the threads don't stick to each other. those 6 strands that make up the thread, they're just like, yep, pull me apart, I'm good. Mrs. Sadis is the same way. Now, does this really make a difference in your stitching? It doesn't really. It's just some knowledge that you will have. You will want to control the lengths of your thread, of what you're stitching with, depending on whether you're working with filament or spun. So if you do know that, it's good knowledge to have. You can use a little bit longer length of thread with the filament silk because it is stronger. It won't pill as easily. With Mrs. Sadis, I usually use about an 18-inch, the same length that I would use for my cotton. With the softer silks, the spun silk, I'll stick with more like a 15, 14-inch. I won't go real long with those because you'll find then that the ends just kind of deteriorate. It gets pilled, you know, it kind of, it doesn't lose its luster. Silk will never lose its luster, but it does have a more softer, it gets even softer and fuzzier looking. Silks that I have on the table are all a different number of strands for the most part. Some of them are 12 strands. So the Splendor's 12, the Gloriana is 12, I believe the Belle Soie is 12. I think the other ones are all 6. There might be a 7 strand in here, but you basically use these the same way you use the cotton, the DMC. You're going to separate out the strands, and if what you're working with calls for 2 strands, you're going to separate them out and then put them back together so that they lay nicely and don't have that twist still to them. Now the different silks are slightly different in how thick they are. And the one that is known to be, I put the DMC here. I'm going to try and lower you a bit so you can see the difference. The Soie d'Alger is known to be slightly thicker than DMC. So there's my DMC strand here. This is the Soie d'Alger, this is the Planet Earth, this is Water Lilies. The Soie d'Alger is about a strand and a half of DMC. For the most part, designers, if you are using the called for silk, the designer will tell you, and the called for fabric, the designer is going to tell you how many strands to use, right? But if you're changing things up at all, you may have to experiment to figure out how many strands work with whichever silk you're using and with whichever fabric you're using. But just go into it knowing that you may have to play a bit and that the different ones do have a different thickness to them. Soie d'Alger is known as the gold standard of silk. It is the one that you'll see a lot of designers use when they're using silk. It has a wide range of colors, and it is known to not have as many thick and thin spots, to be more consistently twisted, to not have any slubs. The Planet Earth, you can see, I think just looking here, that there's a difference in the twist here. There's a slub right here. Not sure you can see that. But the Soie d'Alger is known as the gold standard. A lot of the dyers do use Soie d'Alger as their base. Let's see. So reasons to use silk over cotton. I would say the number one reason, of course, is the shine. Now, mercerized cotton does have a shine. That looks as shiny as some of the silks around here, right? The mercerizing process is a chemical process, and the shine on the cotton will dull over use, over time. It will get softer. The silk shine doesn't go away. It is integral to the fiber. So that's number one. I would say there are going to be projects that you want to treat with a special hand, that you want to have just like a wedding dress. You're not going to make a wedding dress out of polyester, right? Or cotton. You're going to make a wedding dress out of some special material. Silk, think of silk as the same way. If you're starting a project and you're debating between cotton and silk, I would say think about what it means to you, what you want the longevity to be. If you just wanted to have a special touch, I would recommend taking the time to have the extra expense of the silk, because it is more expensive. There's no doubt about that. Let's see. Of course, silk is wonderful to work with. As I said, you work with it the same way you do with cotton. You're separating out your strands and putting them back together. Silk has a wonderful hand, a wonderful feel as it's gliding through the fabric, as it's in your hand. I mean, it's just a beautiful fiber to work with. So, as I said, if you can afford it, if you want to splurge a little bit, I would go for the silk. So silk also, you'll see silk used a lot in specialty stitches because silk has more of a spread. It's not as elastic, or I don't know what the word is, but silk just has a better loft, better coverage than cotton does. So you'll see silk used a lot in the specialty stitches, satin stitch. It's gorgeous in, because not only do you have the loft to silk, you have the shine that's you just can't get. It just, you know, when you're doing something like a satin stitch, you don't want to see the individual threads. You want to see this matte beauty of the color, and that's what silk gives you over cotton. Keep in mind when you're working with silk is because it is softer, you want to have your hands as smooth as possible. So hand lotion is good. There is hand lotion that's made especially for people that work with fibers, whether it's a knitter or a spinner or a stitcher. Udder cream is known as one of them. I like Lavache. I have several bars of Lavache, and Lavache is a bar lotion that you warm in your hands and then spread. It's good to put it on and let it, you know, soak in a little bit before you start stitching. Those are the basics of silk. Now I'm going to clean things off a little bit, show you some samples of stitching with silk, and then we will move into playing with the Mrs. Seda skeins, and this holds true for the Silks for You skeins as well. Anything where you have the silk coming in a skein like this that you need to separate into smaller pieces. So I will be right back. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show you is the lovely Luz Gonzalez. This is a Spanish colonial reproduction sampler by Samplers Remembered. Isn't that gorgeous? So this is stitched using a Vera Soie, or a Soie d'Alger. And this is a case of, and actually this light is really kind of blowing out the colors a bit. The fabric is much yellower than what you're seeing on the screen, a very, very rich cream color. But this is a case where knowing whether the silk is the right size for the fabric is important. This fabric is fabric that is from Victorian Motto Sampler Shop. It was dyed for Eliza Bell Cox, and I got the kit for Eliza Bell Cox, but just because I wanted the products, not because I wanted to do that sampler in particular. So I decided to use it for this. I thought it was a 40 count. It is a 46 count. As you might remember, I said that this Soie d'Alger is known to be about 1.5 thicknesses of a regular strand of DMC. One strand of DMC on 40 count is plenty good coverage. So one strand of Soie d'Alger on 40 would have been a little bit tight. It's even tighter on 46 count. I'm still going to use it, but it's good to know why it was so tight. But anyways, the shine on this, I've moved the light back a little bit. It's not really helping with the color at all. But the shine on this, I don't know whether that's coming through, but silk does make a difference. This is lovely to work on. And yes, I need to get back to it soon. So that is that one with the soie d'Alger. The next one is Green on Green by Rosewood Manor. That is what that one looks like. Totally changed, of course, the color of the fabric and the floss. These are 3 different colors of Silks for You flosses on a piece of burnt bronze by Under the Sea Fabrics that I got at Keepsakes last October. No, 2 Octobers ago. Wow, time flies. Again, the Silks for You silks are gorgeous. I do not know for sure if they are filament or spun. There's a little bit of fuzziness that's happening in some of these when I'm getting down to the end of the strand, but it's certainly not enough that's, you know, a problem, and I just need to make sure I'm using shorter strands for this. So 3 different colors instead of 1 color. It would be gorgeous in 1 color as well. And then the last one I want to show you is Patchwork. So this is the one that I'm using basically all the colors in Mrs. Sadis's palette. I don't have a picture handy to show you, but all of these little motifs are in different colors, and I'm working this as kind of a rainbow across the fabric in all her colors. And again, hers is definitely a filament silk. It is such a pleasure to work with. The shine is wonderful. It does not, the thing about filament silks is they do not tangle as easily. There's very little tangling or knotting as you're working with it. It's just a real pleasure. And again, it wears better. There's not as much wear and tear on the floss as it's going through the fabric. So there are some pieces that are definitely worth the extra expense of silk. All right, I'm going to roll these up, and then we're going to talk about cutting open one of the big skeins. So hold on. Okay, so I have 2 skeins of Mrs. Sadis silk here in front of you. This one is the colorway Aqua, and this is the colorway Hydrangea. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about some decisions you need to make before you start cutting. And the main one is, and this is only going to apply if you want to color control the colors on your piece. And by that I mean you want to have, you can see especially in the aqua, you have the lighter aqua-y green and the more blue. So if you want to be able to use these 2 different colors in different places on your piece, you'll want to cut this differently than if it doesn't matter. Now, looking at it like this, you can see very defined spots of color, areas of color in this skein. And in this skein, you can't as much. The different colors are kind of scattered all across the skein. This usually happens, and I'm not sure, I'll know more once I open it. This usually happens if after the skein has dried, after it's been dyed and it's dried, the dyer, instead of just winding it up into a skein like this, they put it on a spinner, on a Swift, and reskein it. That's an extra step that most dyers of silk floss or of hand-dyed floss don't take, because it's unnecessary, because we're cutting this down into much smaller pieces. Yarn dyers usually do reskein it, and what the reskeining does is that it scatters, let's see if I have a skein, it scatters the color across the skein instead of having blocks of color like this. With this, you can see where she put the dye. With this one and with something like this, you can't. So it makes it more random. And certainly if you want to cut for color, if you want a color control, we would prefer to have the skein like this. And I believe all of Silks for You skeins are like this. Most of Raquel's, Mrs. Sadis's, are as well. So we're going to open these and take a little bit more closer look at them and to get a better understanding of basically how she dyed them. So I'm going to start with the aqua because I think this one will be easier. Let me take the label off first. All right, so to open up the skein, you just want to untwist it so that you have it in basically this big oval. And it is going to be hard for me to show you all of this. I'm going to raise you up just a little bit. You can see all the mess surrounding my nice little white area here. Move that out of the way. So this is what you basically have in a skein, an oval, a long oval. And if you look at this, you can see then where she put the different colors. This is how she had the skein laid out on her dyeing table. And so she put the more bluey turquoise over here and the more greeny over here. And in the in-between areas, that is where the dyes kind of blended together. And so any skein that you open, if it hasn't been reskeined, if you open it, you can really see where the different colors were put. And that gives you more control of where you are going to cut. So in general, Mrs. Sadis's skeins you can use longer lengths. But having said that, let me get out a tape measure here. I'm going to straighten this out again. Our length on each side is about 20 to 21 inches. That is too long. You don't want to have one that long. 21 inches on each side, so 42 for the entire circumference, right? If I want to divide that up evenly, 42 divided by 3 is about 14 inches. So each section, I want to cut 14 inches. If you want to color control it, then again, this is where you make that decision. There's not really 3 colors here though that you could cut. So, I mean, you could cut over here, 14 inches here to get more of the blue, and then maybe, you know, from here around, so you're getting some of the lighter greens and then the darker greens as it's blending into the blue. But in general, I would just be cutting 14 inches. So up here, let me pull this down. What you will find on a skein, and I don't know that I've gotten a big Silks for You skein, so I don't know whether there's the same kind of ties, but this is the same kind of ties that you'll find in yarn. There's one tie that has the beginning and the end tied into a strand that actually goes through the hank. And this is done just to keep things neater, just so the hank doesn't get tangled in the dyeing process. And then there's 2 other ties that are just tied through the hank, but not actually attached to it. So we're going to leave those on there. I'm going to get my big scissors. And I'm going to do 14 inches. Now, you could do smaller, definitely, but 14 is a good length for this. And, you know, it comes out to a nice 3 different chunks. So, and I am by no means like super perfect with this. I start at the tie. I am not caring about color controlling with this one at all. So I have my tape measure at the start up here at the tie where the ends are all tied in, and I'm going to come down here to 14 inches, and I'm just going to stick my scissors there and cut through all of them. Okay, and I'm going to cut up here at the tie as well. And one thing I want you to notice too, even though in general, this is the kind of bluer side, if you look at that, there's lighter blue and there's darker blue. You know, the color travels all through the skein in different ways. And so you don't necessarily have, it's not like when it's hand dyed, it's absolutely consistent. All right, so there is that. Now I'm gonna go to the next chunk, get my tape measure, do a rough 14 inches, so that takes me about an inch past this tie. And again, you know, not all the strands are laying exactly in the same way. Some are a little bit bunched. But I'm gonna cut through that, and just slip that out of there. And there I have 3 lengths of her floss. Pretty, huh? Now, what I would do at this point is get a ring. And I have a package of these that I haven't used yet. You can get these on Amazon. I will link to these below. And I would start separating these out. So first, I need to cut off this tie. That's the one that's knotted in. And what I recommend, whenever you have, here's the other tie, I'm gonna go ahead and cut that one off. Whenever you have this kind of hank with, and if you aren't worried about color control, I would recommend, you may or may not be using all of this on one project. I would say, I would be surprised if there's any project out there, even death by cross stitch, that you would need this whole skein on it. So what I would recommend is kind of put half of it on here and tuck the other half away somewhere safe where you know where it is and can remember where it is. Ask me why I know to say that. And so you only have one or half of it that you're working with at any given time. You don't really need to have all of it out. But what I do recommend is that you take some from each of these chunks so that you get a good mixture of all the colors. Also, as you're working with it, be aware of where you're pulling your next strand from, so you're not always pulling from the chunk that is the same color, because you do want a good distribution. If you're not color controlling, you do want a good distribution of all the colors across your project. So what I do is just, and there's again nothing scientific to this at all, I pull the chunk. I kind of will try and get out some of the kinks that are in it. Not a big deal. So I have this loop underneath my little ring thingy here. This is a cable ring type of thing. And actually I didn't need to open it. That just makes it more difficult to work with. I will close it up here in a second. So I have the loop and I just pull that through. Yeah, it's not the neatest thing, but it keeps it contained. All right, let me do that again with the next chunk. Again, no, I'm not counting how many strands I'm pulling. I don't care if it's the same amount for each chunk, because I'm going to have multiple chunks. I do kind of keep these separated though, just so I know where things are coming from. All right, fold it in half. I have it looped, not looped yet. I have the loop laying behind the cable. Reach through, pull the tails up through the loop. And there it's looped onto the little ring. And then the last one. fold it in half, lay the loop behind the ring, reach through, grab the tails, pull the tails up through the loop. Not sure where that's coming from, or my little tail is there. There we go. So I would just continue doing that, going from one chunk to the next until I have this ring full. I would probably do another ring as well, and then I would tuck the rest away. Look how pretty those colors are. So this is Mrs. Sadis's Aqua. I am going to set this one aside now, and we're going to talk a little bit about this other one. So this one, as I said, it isn't as clear where the different colors are. I do not know that she reskeined this. So we're going to open it up, and that will give us a better feel for just how she created this hank. So we can open it up and untwist it, and we're going to lay it out flat. There's the tie with the knot tying the ends in. And I do the same thing with yarn, with hand-dyed yarn. If I want to get a feel for maybe how many colors, how it's been dyed, that often will give you an idea of how it's going to knit up, whether it'll pull or not, which is something good to know. But I cannot tell. I think she did reskein this one. Or she just used a different process to dye it rather than just putting one color on one side and another color on another side. She might have done more splotching of colors, because there's certainly, I don't think she did reskein it. There's enough solid colors in here, but I think she dyed it differently in that she just was more random in how she placed the color. So this one is not one that you could really color control on. So that's, again, important to know. Open up the skein and look at it and decide if it's going to work for the way you want to work with it or not. And it may not. I think there's too many different colors going on here in random places that wouldn't work. But that's okay. It's a gorgeous skein of yarn. So I think that is all I have for you today. I hope that you find that useful, that it wasn't too much random information. As always, let me know if you have any questions. I am always happy to help. I will link to Mrs. Sadis below. I will link to these rings below. Most of the other, I will link to Silks for You. Most of the other ones you can find in your major cross-stitch stores, 1, 2, 3 Stitch. Most of the other ones are the big ones, the big name brands. So needlepoint stores, there's a lot more available at needlepoint stores than there is at cross-stitch stores when it comes to all the different types of silk. So just be aware of that. If you have a needlepoint store and you want to explore, it's a fun place to explore. All right, guys, that is all for me today. I do not know what I'm going to do for next Monday's video. I need to look at my list and see what's left. I do have some things left, but I don't remember what they are. So we will see you next Monday, though. Until then, you guys have a fantastic week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.